A lot of data to share here. We're going to get through it. It's not going to be a big, huge outline on the investor place part, but it will move swiftly through and make sense when it comes to the BSV segment. So the market is ripe with opportunities for those who navigate it with patience. Very true. Reported originally on January 13th, just a couple days ago. But yeah, we do know that the SEC finally approved 11 Bitcoin ETFs, at least last week. They did have a warning from Investor Place that they felt as though that all of them would be approved. That actually happened. So say what you want. Investor Place had it right again. They're really calling it when it comes to that. But look at this. Highly anticipated approval actually resulted in big short-term sell-off in the crypto assets. Some of you guys who, DM me on X stating like, hey, man, I thought we were going to get like this big upswing action and so on. Well, it didn't help any that Vanguard pulled out of that. I'm not going to talk about that tonight because we talked about last week, but I want to point out some of these key things. Like it says, BTC briefly spiked to 49K after the approval. That is true. Then it crashed to 43K. Most altcoins followed a similar trajectory. And I know you guys have been pointing some of this stuff out. Some of you guys even pointed out some of the short-term things that are going on, right? Like on X, sharing it wherever, right? But it did drop throughout Thursday and, of course, Friday of last week. Here's a representation of where BTC retreated from the 2-year high, basically. And, of course, as always, this is cited from Bloomberg Finance, if you're wondering where we get these charts. Going further down, the most obvious sell the news event ever, if you want to call it that. I've seen some crazy ones in the past as well. But, in a recent memory, this is pretty significant, right? As Investor Place said last week, everyone saw this approval coming, and it's in their own experience in financial markets that when everyone expects something and that something does eventually happen, the short-term reaction is markets is usually the opposite of what everyone expects. Is this basically a Kramer moment? Well, to each his own, right? The consensus opinion was that Bitcoin ETF approval would cause a BTC price surge. We therefore predicted the opposite, saying last week that Bitcoin ETF approval would cause a BTC price drop. I do remember them saying that. That was true also. Things are playing exactly as, of course, they expected. What about for us? What is next from what has happened last week, and where are we going with all this here? Like, do we see anything significant this coming week? Well, pump your brakes on that one. Look more into this. Look at this for a second. Technical evidence, which we'll show you further down in this chart, suggests that BTC needs to consolidate around this crucial 42K mark. Now, for some of you guys who are like BSVs, wanting the BSV news and so on, we're going to get more into that in a second, but we're always pointing out, of course, what's going on with the overall crypto market. I mean, let's face it, guys, 80 to 81% overall crypto market still is circulated around, or focused, I should say, on the likes of BTC and Ethereum, whether you're for them or not. All right, what about this whole thing on the short term? BTC's Relative Strength Index, RSI, has dropped, of course, below 50 and continues to weaken. And if anything, we will point more of that out here in a bit. The MACD has reconverged in a negative manner and looks poised for a bearish crossover above the 0-1. Is this why I titled the thumbnail, to the moon or Mount Doom? A little mixed on that, right? But look at this for a second. The 20-day moving average is starting to roll over. The recent attempt to take out 50K failed. So is it really doom? Well, again, look at this for a second. The bulk of the technical data tells us that after a massive pre-ETF approval rally, BTC needs to now cool off and will likely consolidate around 42K for a few weeks. Now, I do want to point this out. Last time Investor Place said we're going to have consolidation for I guess it was like a few weeks or a month. That actually didn't happen, and things started to pop off a lot more sooner. Could this be another example? Well, we'll see. I mean, they're not, fortune tellers, and neither am I. It's just information, right? Don't take it as financial advice ever, please. Here's the data. They state that they think BTC needs to consolidate, like I mentioned, around that 42K mark. You do see what's going on, for instance, pointing out in the top right area of this chart, again, cited from Bloomberg. It also states this would be a very consistent type thing with what happened with the first gold ETF. A little bit of a history lesson, but it's worth pointing out, right? That was approved back in late 2004. Do you guys remember that? Were you, you know, paying attention more like stocks, bonds, precious metals even back then? I know some of you guys are like really into like silver, gold, and so on, right? But the point is, the first gold ETF, if you remember this, was approved on November 18th back in 2004. Now, that, of course, was an election year. Gold prices rose strongly into that approval. Now, the reason why I point out is election year, we're also now in an election year, literally 20 years later. From May to November of that year, gold rose more than 20%, which is a pretty big move, of course, for gold. But, if you're into crypto and you've been into more than one bull market, you've seen way more gains than that, or you've seen way more losses, depending on when you got in, right? After the approval, though, gold dropped, and we'll show you what we mean with this. It retreated all the way back to its 200-day moving average over the next 2 months. Then, of course, gold boomed. And look at this for a second on the chart. Let's just double check. You can see this okay. Yeah, you do. And yeah, first gold ETF approval led to short-term pain, but long-term gain for gold prices. That's, again, the topic of the night. A lot of data to be shown there. I mean, you see it literally all the way back from that particular time of 2004. You see it on the orange line. You got this whole date of roughly November 18, 2004. Let's face it, that would have been roughly what? A couple weeks after the 2004 election. Okay. Investor Place feels as though a similar dynamic will likely unfold with BTC following the approval of its first ETFs. Short-term pain over the next few weeks, followed by long-term gain over the next 2 years. Are you paper handing all this stuff? That's the bottom line. If you made it this far in this marathon of what we're into, why would you all of a sudden just give up now? I mean, if anything, you have been thought out a crypto winner. You're really going to give it to the FUD? I don't think you are, but maybe there's a few that will. This theory is bolstered by the strong BTC ETF net inflows on Thursday of last week. On their first day of trading, BTC ETFs saw 655 million of net inflows. For comparison, like it says, gold ETFs saw 470 million of net inflows in its first day of trading. And I love how they cite this, because you want to know something? As the saying goes, learn from history. Even though it has to do with gold ETFs, it's still worth pointing out. Just like we always point out the whole thing of what's going on with, these these reports in regards to inflation and everything, and we're still paying attention to that. The high inflow, or I should say the high volume of inflow, suggests that strong demand for these specific products, which corroborates survey data that, of course, Investor Place cited last week. They suggest that lots of fund managers will buy these ETFs over the next few months to increase client exposure to cryptos. Now, a lot of us, of course, are paying attention to what are the next things that we see in regards to these ETFs. Like, what products are next? Is it Ethereum? Is it XRP? Teach his own. But what is important to note is what we see here, that the inflows were uneven. And listen to this, guys. This is a big figure. 90% of the net inflows were driven by just 3 ETFs. Look at this. The Bitwise Bitcoin ETF, which is BITB, the Fidelity Wise Origin Bitcoin Fund, FBTC, and the iShares Bitcoin Trust, IBIT. 2 more ETFs, the ARK21 Shares Bitcoin ETF, which is ARK-B, and Franklin Bitcoin ETF, which is EZBC. Kind of a funny name. Accounted for essentially all remaining inflows. Now look at this. In other words, what does that mean for you in layman's terms? Pretty much all net inflows have thus far been driven by 5 ETFs. Yes, you heard that right, 5. The other 6 have seen very little interest or, of course, demand. Now, does this mean to focus on certain ones? Possibly. And I think they're going to point that out here in a bit. Now, you see the data shown here, especially when it comes to that one of Bitwise, and of course, Fidelity, part of the mix, and so on. But I would agree with that. The demand for those particular ones that were mentioned is an absolute night and day difference compared to the other. Me personally, I wish I would have seen a lot more demand for Wisdom Tree, but if you really think about it, right? Like maybe there'll be more demand if there is some other type of ETPs, as in exchange traded products, in the future for some of these ETFs. Going further down, you do see the whole thing from Grayscale. It was a negative 95.07. And there's the figures again from Bloomberg. This brings us to different theses that we have. Basically, about half of the BTC ETFs that were approved this last week will be defunct within a year. That's crazy, because there was a lot of emphasis to get these things approved, right? We can agree to disagree on some of these figures, but the data, is there. As the saying goes, math don't lie. There's simply far too many Bitcoin ETFs right now. Is there? Would you agree with that? Teach his own. Let me know what you think in the comments. But for context, there are 35 ETFs across the entire 14 trillion gold market. And this is why they reference the whole thing with gold, if you're wondering. So about one ETF for every 400 billion in market cap. And you still don't think that ETFs will bring in a lot towards the overall crypto market? Come on. There are now 11 ETFs across 850 billion Bitcoin market. So about one ETF for every 80 billion in market cap, worth pointing out, right? Too many ETFs will have too little value. Again, why they're focusing on those 5. But will that change in the future? We'll see. Basically, it's like this. If you're looking to buy into BTC ETF, which I don't think most of us are, but maybe there's a few of us, stick with one of the top 5, BITB, FBTC, IBIT, ARC-KB, or even EZBC, right? What they're stating from Investor Place once again is, meanwhile, let us not forget that we are now about 100 days away from the 4th halving, which is the real catalyst for cryptos in 2024. And let's just take a pause to see what's going on with that. So basically, there is a little thing here that says how soon, I believe that is. Let me just refresh that real quick. And why is it not showing? See, before the other day it was showing, but I think they're right about that. I think we're only about roughly 111, 100 so plus days away from the halving. All right, jumping back to this. Yeah, look at this. There has been a lot of fanfare about the ETFs, true, and their approval, and reasonably so. But crypto boom cycles, like we've always pointed out, especially when it comes to 4-year cycles, are centered around the halving events. Yeah, they are. And the 4th one is on deck. And a lot of you guys feel as though it starts with that, then the inevitable utility run. Some people are still not on par with the whole idea and notion of a utility run. But you got to keep in mind, the utility run has never happened in the history of crypto. Will it finally happen after the dependency of BTC and Ethereum dominance end? I think, yeah, that answers that question, but to each his own. But look at this for a second. Days since Bitcoin cycle peak, you do see, for instance, the bottom at minus 75% after 395 days. You had bottom at minus 82% after 419 days in regards to what's in the green, which is the 2017 cycle. The 2013 cycle, which is represented in blue, was what we just pointed out, the bottom at minus 75 after 394 days. And what you also see is the 2021, which is in the gray area, which is still technically the current cycle until we get into the next halving, right? There's the data on that. All right. And like it says in small print, this is, of course, cited from November 30th. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Well, no kidding. I mean, anything crazy could happen to affect some of this stuff. Black swan events. You guys know how it goes. All right. A little bit more about this before we wrap up this segment and get to some of that BSV. We continue to maintain the outlook that Bitcoin, as in BTC, will finish the year around 100K. It's always been consistent with that. I've seen some crazy things over 250K. I think even Force put out a report, right? Over 1 million. Crazy stuff. But they will resume its climb after a temporary post-ETF approval breather over the next few weeks. I don't know. Let's face it. I mean, it could be a month, right? But if you're going to point out one thing that was wrong with the Investor Place, they didn't get right when it came to the consolidation. Whoop-de-doo. They therefore believe that the great buying opportunity that they have been waiting for is finally here. But let's face it, for most of us, is it really finally here? I mean, if you're the type of guy in which you just want to catch it right before everything blasts off, I guess you could say that's where we're finally here. For me personally, I was the type of guy I was like, no, I loaded up with on the time of like extreme fear, which let's face it, BTC being roughly around 15.8 during the time of the FTX fiasco, late 2022, right? Over the next few weeks, they fully expect to execute a series of new crypto trades that they view as the best cryptos to buy in 2024, capitalize on a fourth crypto boom cycle. I share some of these picks they have. Obviously, Stellar is one of them and so on, but they have some other ones and so on. Like they've always been big on Solana. They've always been big on Cosmos. If you're just wondering, some of the few that really stand out, Filecoin. They're particularly interested in cryptos in the overlap of blockchain and AI. I am as well. They've narrowed down their potential buy list for a few cryptos in that space. Of course, they want us to stay tuned and so on. But basically speaking, I wanted to share that with you because what we're going to do now is going to jump into the next segment. All right. So how do we realistically tie in the whole thing of what was presented with BSV? Well, check this out for yourself. It involves a little bit of mainstream news, a little bit of extra research. You're not going to be disappointed when it comes to this. And I also want to give a shout out to BSV Stacker for saying, hey, Max, you need to do a video on this. It'd be pretty cool to get into this. So I do get credit where credit's due. BSV Stacker, thank you so much for the research. Again, guys, we are a community of blockchain and DLT enthusiasts, and we share research. If you want to be a sideline reporter, again, just give me a follow over here. You can tag me, and if it's worthwhile, we'll share it. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, right? All right, let's pull this up. This is what you've been looking for, hopefully, Mr. Lionel Richie. All right, so you're going to see a guy that you may not like to stare at, but guess what? It's you know who. It's the one and only Mr. Gary Gensler. Well, what is up with this? Well, look at this for a second. BSV Stacker posted this, and he says, get ready because this will be the wild, or this will be wild. They know that BTC isn't the real Bitcoin. And he says, let's effing go, right? Posted from USA Today. We're going to get into some of this key highlights. I mean, I like the screenshots. Satoshi Nakamoto's idea of Bitcoin broken by ETF, SEC chairman claims. Did he really say this? Did Gensler really say this? Yes, the answer is yes. We'll share that in a bit. And here's the recent interview. We'll show you that interview. Basically, Gensler stated in this message, he explains why he believes the current version of Bitcoin stands far away from the original vision of its mysterious creator, Satoshi Nakamoto. Why would Gensler even say anything about this, right? I'm not saying I'm pro Gensler. God, no, right? But if anything, I think Mr. BSV Stacker is right. It's worth pointing out. So let's take you to this. All right. Here it is, straight from USA Today. This, again, was just a few days ago. And look what's mentioned here. As we pull it further down, you'll see this was on Saturday, January 13th, the same day as that investor placed report. And I'm just going to take you straight to the tweet, or the repost, I should say, that was shared on X. So we had disapproved a number of these over the years, and something had changed, says Gary Gensler on Bitcoin Spot ETF. Taking a new court decision into consideration, we move forward. I think this is the most sustainable path forward. Well, let's speak for itself. This actually was originally posted Friday, and then of course it was, reshared on X. Or I should say reshared on, USA Today. Mainstream news, right? Sometimes we do share the mainstream news. All right, let's let it speak for itself. Let's go ahead and play this. Here we go.
Let me start by asking.
Let me rewind that for a second. About 5.5 minutes. The whole thing is worth pointing out. All right, so I'll be back in just a minute. Here we go.
Let me start by asking you this. Do you consider the decision historic? And it appears that it's a decision that you made either reluctantly or perhaps even begrudgingly.
Well, look, Andrew, this has been considered for a long time. As you know, starting under Chair Clayton, we had disapproved a number of these over the years, and something had changed. I'm a deep believer in the rule of law and a respect for the courts. and taking a new court decision into consideration, we move forward. I think this is the most sustainable path forward.
So it appears, though, from what you're saying and reading through the decision as well, that what changed is not necessarily something inherent to crypto or Bitcoin per se, but what changed was what the courts did. Is that the way to think about this?
Well, again, I mean, we do everything here at the Securities and Exchange Commission within the law and within how the courts interpret those laws. And that's what the American people expect, and that's what we do here.
What is your message to investors about Bitcoin now? Because we're going to have all sorts of public investors now potentially have access to Bitcoin in a way that they didn't before. We were just talking to Larry Fink. He said that he got a huge wave of new investors getting into Bitcoin through this ETF. You have still suggested to be cautious about it. And I'm trying to understand how you think about those cross currents in terms of the message you're telling investors.
Well, look, Bitcoin itself, we did not approve, we do not endorse. This is a product called an exchange-traded product, a way that investors can invest in that underlying non-security commodity called Bitcoin. But yes, investors, I think, should be aware that the underlying asset is a highly speculative, volatile asset. And amongst its use cases is really for illicit activity, money laundering and sanctions and ransomware and the like. And I know that you've asked other people over the last few days, is it being used as a store of value? It's a speculative, volatile store of value. Is it being used as a payment anywhere? Are we buying cups of coffee with it? Not really. The only payment mechanism it's being used for in sort of in a primary sense is illicit activity. So I think you've been spot on about that, Andrew.
So just on that note, Mr. Chairman, this is out, and I'm not going to take either side on the whole thing, and it's kind of funny. But these are, I don't know the exact units, but if you look since 2017, what's been used to launder money, 20,000 is the unit for, 20,000 is the unit for $1, 33 is the unit for Bitcoin. So that's a multiple of, I don't know how much for dollars being used for money laundering versus Bitcoin. But now I could see Bitcoin bears saying, really? Well, it's not even good for money laundering. Then it has zero value. I could just see that as another arrow in the quiver for the bear case. But the question I wanted to ask you was this: let's take the continuum. Let's take the rat poison, Beanie Baby, Jamie Dimon, Charlie Munger versus we had yesterday on our Coinbase CEO. Did you hear him make the case for Bitcoin? I mean, it was almost like a symphony to Bitcoin bulls, Chair Gensler. The proof of work, akin to gold. Every monetary aspect we've had for thousands of years is represented perfectly. And Tom Lee, there's never been a mistake on the blockchain out of trillions of transactions. You understand it. You taught at MIT. Which is it? Is it a Beanie Baby in your view, or is it something that has inherent value that's going to be part of the financial system decades from now? Which is it?
Look, no doubt there are innovations within this field, and those innovations, which I taught about at MIT around a ledger system. It's just an accounting system called the blockchain technology. But there's an irony in the midst of this. Satoshi Nakamoto said this was going to be a decentralized system. And finance, this has led to centralization. Think about the irony of those who say this week is historic. This was about centralization and traditional means of finance that investors who could already express themselves in Bitcoin, you could already, before this week, buy it through major brokerage houses. But now you can buy it through this thing called an exchange-traded product.
exchange traded products. We're going to see more exchange traded products. The point I wanted to share with you guys in regards to why we share this period is, like when he mentions innovations, how can you actually consider BTC like advancing consistently, being innovative and so on? There's a scalability issue, right? We're preaching to the choir at this point. But if anything, this is something I want to bring to your attention. And to wrap it up on this segment, what about Craig Wright? You know, if he's really Satoshi Nakamoto, then what happens when crypto regulations will come into effect? And would it basically make life a lot easier, not only for Craig Wright, but also for BSV in general? Well, we have an answer for that. And if anything, check this out for a second, because it'll bring light to the subject. All right. I literally fast forwarded to this part. I think you guys know what the answer is, but nonetheless, check this out. Let's speak for itself. Here we go.
How would Bitcoin SV be affected by any kind of regulation that you think should be introduced that isn't there now?
Oh, we won't at all. I mean, we've always been sort of working to stay within all of the legal frameworks in this country. So it'll just make our life easier, as everyone else has to now start doing things that we've been doing already.
I wonder whether there's a contradiction between the government saying we want to regulate crypto in the UK and we want to make the UK a sort of hub for the crypto business. I would have thought the crypto business would really go away from a place that is highly regulated.
Crypto maybe, but not blockchain, not logistics. So the real applications that the government wants to see are not crypto. So if you're talking about sort of, say, like Unisat and tracking the movement of fish,
Supply chain.
then that has nothing to do with trading on crypto markets.
But that doesn't really need regulating, does it?
But I mean, it's covered under law. So, I mean, there's no, they self-regulate. They don't go out there touting themselves.
I think when the government,
money.
I think when the government talks about regulating, it really means protecting consumers from being ripped off.
But the difference here is Unisat aren't like many of the ICO people who go out there promising the world and not delivering. So instead of building a company and seeking to increase sales and the old-fashioned way, these other people want to get the money first and then pivot.
I mean, one of the things you said at the workshop was that you wanted to see N-Chain doing a better job of sales and marketing. I mean, so I suppose my question is, I don't really know what goes on at N-Chain, but doesn't Bitcoin technology or BSV sort of just recommend itself to people who understand this stuff? Does it really need to be marketed in the way that a business or a consumer product would?
How do you know about it?
Well, I suppose if you're in that sector, that's part of your job, isn't it, to know what's available in
Which
technology?
sector?
Supply chain, media, all sorts of areas, I suppose.
But why would these people know about things that haven't been created yet? So, for instance, we have solutions that would suit DHL, and when we scale, it'll become even cheaper, etc. But if someone's out there telling them, there's going to be knowledge. If there's no one telling them, then how do they know? I mean, there's a blockchain thingy, and there's like 20,000 other ones that promise to do a whole lot of things. How do we know that yours actually does?
It's just that everyone always draws the comparison between blockchain and the internet, but people didn't have to go out and sell the internet to entrepreneurs.
Wrong. I went to parties by Cisco, from Sun. I got flown around the world when I was young because of Digital Equipment Corporation. No, I mean, Interop. If you think about the Interop conference that we're around the world every year. Big, massive conferences, multi-day events.
Trying to encourage people to start businesses on the internet.
Yes.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, huge. Cisco conferences I went to, they had celebrities and all sorts of things. I mean, far more than the crypto waste industry now. They've wasted even more in the dot-com boom. So,
I mean, one thing about N-Chain is that I know that when you were in the early days of Bitcoin, when you had your own company, De Morgan, in Australia, you were developing specific applications like for the cinema chain Hoyts, and also you had a smart meter company, Grey Fog. Why aren't you creating those specific business ideas at N-Chain rather than having this sort of grand overview of everything?
well, I mean, we're creating the technology that will run it all. So we have to scale and make Bitcoin more robust. So to do all these things that I want people to do, I need to basically take Bitcoin to where it's going to scale to billions of transactions a second.
You guys want to leave it at that? I mean, to run it all, billions of transactions per second. Pretty crazy stuff. Run it all is pretty massive. We'll play a little bit more about this, but it's good stuff. Here we go.
But I thought it was all done and dusted from the day it was released.
No, of course not.
But what about this protocol set in stone?
Oh, protocol's one thing, the code's another.
Oh,
I mean, you
okay.
don't need to change. You can run WinSock, which will connect to TCP/IP, and WinSock from 1988 will still connect to the internet. It will be single-threaded, and it will probably do 1K per second. And if you want to watch that movie on Netflix, you'll probably have to have 3 days worth of download before you get 5 minutes. But technically, it's the same protocol.
How do you describe what it is that you're doing that is not the protocol then?
So the sort of ability to distribute and send data. So I said there'd be big blocks, but I didn't describe how that will happen. And I said at the time, blocks of the size of 2 DVDs or more, even for where we should be now. And as you know, that's 10 gigabytes. So I'm talking now about over a terabyte. And if we're talking terabytes worth of data, and it's not minutes, you have to be able to send those in 3 to 5 seconds. Now,
I just want you guys to think about something here, okay? Just hear me out. Whether you're for Craig Wright being Satoshi, or you're like, nah, he's fake Toshi. What is one thing that is consistent with a, pathological or compulsive liar? They always have to think about what they're going to say, and especially how it rolls off the tongue and so on. You don't see anything about this guy trying to come up with stuff of, well, did I say this back so many years ago? When it comes to these block sizes and so on. No, it's all natural. I do want to at least point that out. Let's play a little bit more about this.
Now, if you think about it for a moment, can you copy a terabyte of data from your hard drive at home in 5 seconds?
No.
No. So we have to have distributed systems and new ways of actually multi-threading data so that we can actually do this quicker than most people think is physically possible. And in doing that, we've had to invent new technology, new methodologies, all sorts of things.
But people who are not involved with that work can still go on using Bitcoin in exactly the same way that they did on day one when you released it.
Oh yeah, that'll work the same. But the distinction is it won't hit some hurdle where the transaction cost goes up to $30 or $40.
There you go. Hold on a second, because I know sometimes you can hear me if the volume's playing. So yeah, it won't go up to $30, $40. You know what I mean? You're not gonna hit all these crazy, thresh or where it gets to the point where it's just slow tech, if you will, right? That's one thing that's obviously stand out with BSV. But yeah, in conclusion, I want to share some of those key things with you guys. I think obviously with correct, I guess you say legislation that makes sense, proper crypto regulations and so on, it is going to be a win for BSV. I've seen naysayers from the other side, BTC Maxi, say, nope, with proper regulations, you guys are sunk. But you want to know something? Time and time again, when it comes to innovation, it's the innovators right? So if you have old tech, that's like kind of like dinosaur technology, as the saying goes, why would that prevail over newer and more innovative solutions? And especially if we're talking about Bitcoin, as in this is the original protocol, the original Bitcoin with, maximum scalability and then some, why would it be in favor of BTC? And I get the whole thing of store of value and so on. And if anything, I mean, I get where some people actually, and I've seen some people, they own both, but I'm going to go with the one that's more innovative. Why? Again, it's just history.